Okay, we finished working on the piano player by manipulating DOM events with JavaScript, and now we are working on HTML forms. Okay, so here is the introduction. Taking a while to load. What's up? Hello? Come through. Alright, so introduction. Modern websites require a lot of information to function as intended. And it went away again. Information like our usernames, passwords, friends, likes, credits, card information, and shopping orders all have to be provided by users on the front end and sent to the web application servers so they can be processed. The information is used to create a personalized experience for the user. User information is traditionally collected using HTML forms. If you ever entered text in a website selected from options on a list or checked boxes and then hit enter or pressed a button, you likely filled out and submitted an HTML form. In order for the data submitted through forms to be useful, it's essential that the information is valid. If you are allowed to accidentally submit your last name where your address was expected, your package would never show up. The process of checking that information submitted through a form adheres to expectation. Through a form adheres to expectation is called form validation. In this lesson, we'll explore the different techniques for validating form inputs. Okay, take a look at the form provided. It's a bare bones HTML page with no validation. You can play around with it and get to know the different types of inputs on an HTML form. Take a look at the form provided. It's a bare bones HTML page with no validation. You can play around with it and get to know the different types of inputs on an HTML form. It's a bare bones HTML page with no validation. No validation. So that means there is no process of checking that the information submitted through a form adheres to expectation. You can play around with it and get to know the different types of inputs on an HTML form. Think about any other forms you've submitted today. Did you log into any sites? Use the search bar, buy something online. There's a cheat sheet for this section. What for? HTML forms. Data list element. That's something I haven't seen yet. A lot of new things here. I definitely need to go through this. Why validate forms? Oh, there's a music video. Most data, once submitted, is stored by a website or a web application. It's stored in a database on the server side. There are important reasons for us to make sure the information that will be stored in the database is accurate. We want operations that depend on the data to work. Allowing a user to enter an incorrectly formatted email address, either on purpose or by accident, means that we won't be able to contact that user later. Allowing a user to sign up for an account with a username that is already in use could cause numerous errors down the line. Making sure we collect all the data we need and checking that the data are formatted correctly can save a web application and its users a lot of trouble. We want to keep our site secure. Unprotected data leaves entry points for malicious actors to hurt our application or our users. Allowing a user to submit a non-secure password means that their account will not be protected. Unprotected forms can also allow bits of code to be injected into our servers. This can potentially leave our users' sensitive information exposed. The malicious actor could even gain control of our site or corrupt our existing data. Oh wait, we need to watch this video. And is it a video? Or just... oh wait, there's no sound coming from the video. Alright. Sending data to the server. For the user sends data. Oh. It's a hacker. Compromise. Uh-oh, it's compromised. That was a very fun video. Was there supposed to be audio to that? I don't think so. Let me see again.
Yeah, I'm gonna call it right now. I think I found the single biggest productivity hack of 2021. It's this Google Chrome extension called Speechify, and it literally does my reading for me.
So let's say you have to read an...
Okay, so... hold on, let me check. Okay. Alright, now... so there's no sound to that video, so we don't need to play that again. Oh, so it's also case sensitive. Parentheses 617 doesn't work. Whoa. Why doesn't the parentheses? Why don't they take into parentheses? What about? Wow, it skips the parentheses. Okay. So regular expressions. Data submitted through forms are stored as strings. Strings are fundamental data type in computer science, representing a series of characters strung together. As humans, we can intuitively recognize patterns within strings, and this allows us to catch errors. Try to notice what's wrong in the following example. As humans, we can intuitively recognize patterns within strings, and this allows us to catch errors. Try to notice what's wrong in the following examples. Try to notice what's wrong in the following examples. There's this one, there's this. E, F, G. Maybe there's an extra number. There's a missing letter here. Usually zip code is 5 digits, right? In the first example, we had the letters of the alphabet presented in order but interrupted by out of place 2. In the second, we left off the 5th digit of a famous zip code. It's a famous zip code. In the third, we omitted the A from the word cat. In the final example, we wrote some HTML with an H1 opening tag but an unmatching H2 closing tag. If you picked up on these mistakes, it's because your brain has been trained to expect patterns in certain types of data. Unlike humans who can get this training passively over time, computers have to be precisely programmed to recognize patterns. To specify patterns for the computer to recognize, we use a special language called underline regular expressions underline, also known as regex or reg expression. A regular expression is a sequence of characters representing a pattern. We can use that pattern to match a string, match parts of a string, confirm that data is formatted acceptably, or even replace parts of strings with different characters. Try entering some patterns in the applet provided. If you enter LO, you will notice how many of the examples include those characters. We could fully match all the expressions with the pattern. To match the first 4 expressions, we could use a pattern like hello, so there's a square bracket as they're using square brackets as some kind of delimiter. So these two would be possible first digits, and the caret looks like it represents every single digit, any character, not digits. The pattern will match the 2 example phone numbers. 2 example phone numbers, which is this one. 3, as long as there's a 3, no. This is probably saying as long as there are 3 digits. Anything can come before that. Anything, and then another 3 digits, and then 4 digits. All separated by hyphens. Oh, just the last 2 has to be separated by hyphens because there's no hyphen here. Client-side validation. HTML. The first technique we can use to validate form data is to prevent problematic inputs from being submitted in the first place. This is called client-side validation. The client is the process interacting with the server on behalf of a user. In case of the websites, the web browser is the client. The logic for validating the form is included with the code that displays the form on the user's device. No interaction with the backend is required to perform client-side validations. No interaction with the backend is required to perform client-side validations. No interaction with the backend is required to perform a client-side validation. The logic for validating the form is included with the code that displays the form on the user's device. Wow, no need to interact with the backend. Since form validation is so common, modern HTML provides some of these validation features built in. For example, we can use HTML to make parts of a form required and others optional. We can also use HTML to set minimum and maximum values for an input or minimum or maximum lengths for a text input. We can even necessitate that the input match a particular pattern specified by a regular expression. Set minimum and maximum values for input, or minimum or maximum length for text input. If any of these rules laid out in the HTML form validation are followed, the user will not be able to submit their form, and they'll receive an error message explaining why. With these checks in place, the backend is less likely to be sent incorrect data. HTML form validation will also benefit the user. The client provides the user immediate feedback without having to wait for time-consuming communication with the backend. The provided HTML form has 3 input fields that are required. Try submitting the form without any one of them. Notice how a message appears on the form. We didn't have to design that ourselves. It's built into HTML. Okay, so we left this one out. Each input has additional requirements. Name input requires a text input with a length input between 3 and 100. The age input requires a number input. Please fill this one out. Between 1 and 123, code input requires an input of either Codecademy or Codecademy. Try out the form with correct and correct inputs for each fields. Okay, so it's built in. We just have to use the input label. It's all inside of forms. Nothing too complex here. Client-side validation. client-side validation JavaScript. Client-side validation has two main advantages. First, it's better experience for the user to be alerted to problematic data immediately rather than having to wait for that information to come back from the server and have to fill out the form again. Second, catching mistakes earlier in the process saves the application time and resources as well. But not all issues can be handled with the built-in HTML validations. In order to truly customize validation or to perform more complex validation, we can incorporate JavaScript form validations. We can do this by either writing the JavaScript ourselves or by incorporating a JavaScript library. If we have unique requirements for usernames on our site, for example, we'll have to provide these systems of validations ourselves. If we're creating a relatively simple website, it makes sense to code the form validation ourselves or use a simple vanilla JavaScript. Just validate, for example. Let's check out just validate. It's a package. And it's written in TypeScript. So we just use it to just validate it just like that. Okay, anyways. This can get tricky, but most basic validation libraries will involve directly accessing or manipulating the DOM. This can get tricky when working with a framework that relies on a virtual DOM like React or Vue. In those situations, it might be best to incorporate a library that works well with your specific framework. For example, the Formic library is a lightweight library that simplifies validating forms in React app. Awesome. You can build forms with React with this package. Cool, I'll have to check that out later. Play around with the websites we provided. It's a password validator with some specific requirements. This validation is done completely on the client side using JavaScript. Specifically, it uses a library called Parsley.js. What is that? Another way of validating, and they said that this application uses Parsley. Let me see something. Okay, let's type in 3 letters. Must contain the word validation. Must contain a number, must contain brackets. Alright, and then wow, that was really cool. I should use parsley. We should use parsley. Back-end validation. Let's watch this video first. Okay. So back-end validation. No matter how complete the front-end validation of a website or application seems, validation must be completed on the back-end or server side. Front-end validation are easy to bypass. A malicious user can simply turn off JavaScript on their browser, for example. There's also the potential for middleman attacks in which data is changed after the request is submitted by a user, but before it arrives at the server. As a rule, the backend should never trust the data it receives. As a developer, once data is in the backend, we have complete control over it, luckily. Backend validation has several advantages. It enables us to use validation code often on machines with more computing power. It allows us to write validation code that a user can't see. If the malicious user can't see exactly how we validate the data, it's much more difficult for them to find ways around it. So as a developer, once data is in the backend, we have complete control over it. We use validation code. We can validate the information against other data the front end doesn't have access to, for example. We can check our database to see if a given username is already in use. There are two main ways to validate inputs on the server side. The first take place while the user is still inputting data into the form on the front end. We can make asynchronous requests to the server with pieces of their data and send feedback directly to the user before they've submitted. This is slower than front-end validator and can be design challenged from a user experience perspective. This can be slower than front-end validation and can be a design challenge from user experience perspective. The second one is once the form has been submitted. Back-end form validation is our application's last defense against problematic data. And it's essential to verify the validity and safety of data before adding it to a database. This is also an opportunity to sanitize the data. In order for our database to be useful, it's important that all data within it is formatted consistently. This means that while we may want to be flexible about the formatting we require from a user, we likely want to transform inputs into a strict format before entering them in the database. The video illustrates the process of validating forms on the backend. Right, so it was sent it to the backend first, and then it sends it back to the front end. Okay. Okay, now the review. In this lesson, we've explored form validation from many angles. Let's review what we covered. Modern website. They require a lot of information from their users, and they collect a lot of information through HTML forms. It's essential to validate the data submitted through forms to keep websites secure and to make sure they function correctly. Regular expressions are sequences of characters that define patterns to look for in text. They are an important tool used in validating input. Regular expressions are sequences of characters that define patterns to look for in text. They are an important tool used in validating input. Modern HTML comes with useful built-in methods for form validation. Custom and complicated client-side validation can be accomplished with JavaScript. Asynchronous requests to the server can perform back-end validations before a form has been submitted. It's an asynchronous request. A final back-end validation of all data is required to ensure an application's security and sanitize all data. What is this? XKCD. Wow. This is a good link. I'm going to share this into the chat. So this is a famous comic strip, and they call it the Bobby's, I think it was called Bobby Tables joke. Has something to do with hacking. Anyways, I think I will end the video here. Yes, I will. And thank you all for running with me. See you all next time.